Good morning. I want to say colleagues globally, locally, and then very importantly, the NSDF. I want to say I was so privileged to win this award. It was beyond being emotional. I just went and bought myself flowers, and I now have flowers in my house every time because it's a very important message. You can do it. You can achieve an award like that. And I wanted today just reflect on some of the research and just give you a little bit of a local and a global context. And very importantly, share a message with all of you. So this is about the circular economy. That's what we all talk about. And climate change. I think every single meeting I go to that pops up. The UN last week, it's clear, climate change, we have to deal with it. But it's also about the environment, how we protect it, how we look after it, and how we see the environment within the context of water, plants, and foods. And how do we move towards convergence? And I want to very specifically highlight food safety. Food safety within the context of food security, biosecurity, One Health, because these are the kinds of terminology we now have. And that's really what gets you to get funding. If you put these big proposals together and to really attract global funding. And that's very important. But the trick now is partnerships. And I want to just touch on some of the work we've done in the Centre of Excellence around antimicrobial resistance within this water plant food nexus. And I want to acknowledge particularly the Water Research Commission, who has for the last 20 years funded our program extensively. It is such an important and incredible partnership. And I also want to acknowledge DSTI and the NRF for consistently supporting us, believing in us, helping us to fund our postgrad students. It's really game changers. But let's just take back, and I try to highlight the importance of food safety in One Health. Everyone's talking about One Health, and I often sit there a little bit like the lost child, because I operate in plant health, and plant health always gets lost in the conversation. So yes, we know there's a connectedness between human health and animal health. But plant health is critical for all of this. And it's not in this picture because I want to talk about plant health in this whole context, because I think that's the glue between all of that. Because healthy plants give healthy people and healthy animals. And yes, climate change and environmental health contribute to plant health. And this is now where the food safety bit comes in. When we talk about foodborne diseases or antimicrobial resistance, because plants is the conveyor. It's almost like a conveyor belt through this whole story, and it connects it all. What we do know is that there's a big shift happening. Climate-driven floods, for instance, will spread these zoonotic diseases. And we have seen an increase in emerging infections from an animal source. What's happening on the plant side? What we do know is that if we have floods and if we have contaminated water, it directly affects our plants. So irrigation directly affects, and now suddenly we can make this link between contaminated water, irrigation of crops, and then obviously contamination. So, and I want to move on to my next slide and just share with you a little bit the importance of, and I hope my slides is moving and that you can see my slides. But I just want to now take you back to this. Thank you. So I just want to take you back to the circular economy. And there's so many maps of this, and the complexity of it is so important. But what I want to ask young scientists particularly, and you in the beginning of your career, and you have to build your career. So yes, you're growing in a silo and you're becoming the world specialist in, for instance, just AMR. And now suddenly we put these big programs together and we say, well, you can't do your research in isolation anymore because it's all linked. And you have to work in teams. Now, I just want to take you on this circular journey for a minute or two. Because the global warming will impact water, surface water sources in the center, the groundwater. And yes, we use that water, and often these waters will be pumped into holding dams, and then from there, farmers will irrigate it, and these will be commercial farmers, even small-scale farmers, and it gets used in the whole, not only for drinking, washing, and cooking, but it gets used not only for irrigating crops, but for animal production. But then it goes further. It gets used in slaughtering, packaging, processing. The whole food system is connected. And this is now where water policies, water regulation comes in. And the impact, downstream impact of all the water users, your mining industry, your processing industry, how do they affect the water quality? And then we start asking the question, well, what is South Africa's water quality about? Do we have water security? And then, of course, what about water sovereignty? So these are critical matters for all of us within this water, plant, food nexus. So we need to understand this connection. We need to understand the importance. You contaminate one, you spoil it all. And I think it's very important because the nexus represents these critical intersections. And this is where environmental contamination happens. It affects agricultural practices and then directly affects food safety. And with it comes the latest, the AMR challenges within this. So let's just take a step back around food safety. And food safety is interesting because if you go and do a network analysis and you say, well, where's the key focus? Who's working together? What's the big global topics? Where's researchers focusing on? Then we see within the food safety dynamic space, it's obviously quality of water, cross-contamination, and then you see the antimicrobial resistance popping out on the one side. And we see if we analyze the data and the focus areas of scientists between 2016 and 18, people were just working on hygiene, hazards, cross-contamination, and then slowly they started looking at street vendors, the impact of that. If we move towards the 20s, we suddenly see people shifted focus to the big salmonellas, the E. coli's, the listerias, and then came antibiotic resistance. And then in the more recent period from the 20 onwards, the shift was really, let's use whole genome sequencing. Look, let's move into One Health. Let's start with surveillance. So these are important indicators. And the most important part of the story is the water. So for us, the water, be it irrigation water, be it wastewater, and if we go and globally do metadata analysis, just to better understand what's happening in our continent, and we start comparing some of these studies, and this was a nice publication that our team had, and we just look at extended spectrum beta-lactamase producing Enterobacteriales. So that's that whole group in this whole water plant food nexus. And we just take the results, the data coming out of a 10, 20-year period. We can see that some of these countries, we have a significant prevalence of these. Now, what's also very important to remember is your test methods used. So the one important thing, and this can maybe be the challenge for NSTF, is how do we support laboratories? How do we ensure that data is interoperable, is fair, that we can link our data and get better assessments from them? So if we analyze the laboratories, the methods they use, and it do differ, and it's not calibrated. And I think there's a lot to be said for research laboratories and perhaps developing a research laboratory framework, very similar to the diagnostic laboratories using ISO 17025 and laboratory accreditation framework. And yes, I know that's too stringent for research laboratories. I know. I had 6 years of accredited laboratory running one within a research environment, and it's difficult. But we must compare results. We must know what's happening because water connects us. So if I just take those research groups, and I just take 3 pathogens, E. coli and the Salmonella and Klebsiella, and I just go and analyze AMR within that context. Where do I see the biggest significant shifts happening? Who's doing the most research? Which pathogens emerge? And what's the level? If I use the AMR index, what is the level in different countries and what's busy happening in the countries? We can also go and unpack the literature and look into the popular press and look globally, what's happening globally versus South African. And there's a lot of publications and reviews and studies around water quality, and then the impact on fresh produce, for instance. And then we start linking it with outbreaks. And we're saying, well, what is South Africa doing? So I'm going to take you on this journey. And first of all, show you just how we've been building a network of excellence, how we've developed a diagnostic laboratory framework, and how we've actually taken funding, global funding, and we've started working with international groups and utilize our funding to better understand what's happening in the South African environment. So obviously we would standardize our methods and sure that the methods that we use and the data we generate is fair, and we make sure we publish, and we try and always continuously upscale, improve, and bring in the latest technologies as far as we can. Because that's the future, to be really on top of it. And then we would say, okay, fine, we have the tools, we have the methods, and we know that we can start looking at this connectedness. So let's start with irrigation water. Let's start with the rivers. And we start both looking at enumeration, selective enrichment, isolation, and we also look at using tools such as whole genome sequencing. We've done a lot of microbiome work within the water plant foods nexus, but I'm going to just unpack some trends for you. And what's very important, we now link it. We go into the water, we go into the agricultural soils, we look at the crops that's now produced, and then we look at the point of sale. And we actually follow this chain. We'll follow the whole same crop journey. And then we will look at what's really happening. And we look at hygiene, and we look at signals. And at the bottom slide, you can actually see an informal stall where fresh produce is currently being sold. Now, being in food security, I can tell you, we want people to eat fresh produce. It's healthy. It's better than processed food. It's better than the evil 3 C's, Coke, chocolate, and chips. And I always say to my students, apple a day keeps a doctor away. Eat fresh produce. But is the fresh produce safe? And at the bottom, you can see spinach. And what's usually happening at all these little informal stalls, they use water to keep the spinach fresh. But that water, is it safe? Is it potable? And that's where our challenge comes in. What we also do, we've taken groups of students, we've put them in what we call a one food context, and we started looking at different scenarios. And I want to show you, these are different farms, 6 different farms we've been comparing. And what we were doing, the one is aquaponic farm, and the one is integrated farming, organic farming, conventional, commercial, big, large scale farming, or smaller farms, and we look at different water sources. Are they using river water, dam water, municipal water, borehole water? And we look at how do they irrigate the crops? Do they have a circular economic cycle in their farm, like on the aquaponic? Do they use the aquaponic water recycle it back into irrigation? Do they have poultry, chicken, pigs? What's happening? Is that manure being worked into the soil? And what can we say about contamination in that cycle? And what can we say if we use these tools? What can we say about commercial farms and small-scale farming? And if we unpack all these tools, and we've got a lot of tools, and now suddenly we have a lot of opportunities to publish, and we have been publishing a lot. Now we can say, okay, what we know is that these things are connected. We can actually show virulence genes. We can go and look at antimicrobial resistance genes because we now have adequate funding, except some of our funding has suddenly been blocked or stopped, sadly, but it's fine because there's alternative funding streams that's coming in. But what is important is to connect and to focus on those key issues. So if I just take one group of cluster of samples where we've done, for instance, 10,000 samples over a period of time, and we've just focused on 4 pathogens, your ESBL producing categories, your Enterobacteriales, your Enterobacters, your Klebsiella, Serratia, E. coli, etc., etc. And we see, well, do we have multi-drug resistance? Is it something to be concerned of? And then we ask ourselves, okay, fine, you can use, say, 2,500 samples, you can generate 8 publications, you can end up with 550 isolates. And then what's happening with multi-drug resistance within that library of isolates? And Must we worry? Is it important? How do we reflect the findings and how do we move this into the policy domain? So I'm going to show you that a little bit later on. And I am aware of the time, and please also remind me if my time is up. But let me show you a real case scenario. So here we are focusing on our specific cluster of pathogens that we want to work on. And then suddenly there's an outbreak. And this is what really happened. We were in the middle of a project and suddenly there was a cholera outbreak. And it was just up the street. Not too far from us in that zone, just outside Pretoria, a massive area with informal settlements and small-scale farmers. And the Water Research Commission said to us, go, please see if you can help us, go and find out. And we suddenly had to shift our lab and get Vibrio controls in. But the point I want to make, we could do it. We could, within a month or two, be ready, be sampling, and do excellent results and convert that into information that the Water Research Commission could use. And that's, to me, very important message to support our local researchers and ensure that we connect it so that if we have these outbreaks, we have capacity, capability, and our data is fair and interoperable. And we can use that to help government and guide. Now, I want to touch on another very interesting example and just show you how interesting it is. We've been working with the veterinary science faculty, and then they said to us, cryptosporidium to us is so important. It's a sleeping giant. And we said, look, we don't work with crypto. Sorry, we don't have the methods. We know it's a very important waterborne pathogen. It functions through the fecal-oral route, but we know it's a food safety issue. But we don't know if it's important in South Africa. And we don't think it's important in fresh produce production. But if you go and look at the literature, yes, it's telling us a different story. It's saying, yes, these are connected. And this is now where that water plant food nexus comes in. And we do see spikes in crypto globally. And we look at other countries, particularly in Europe, and we're saying, well, if that is happening in Europe, what's happening in South Africa? Is it just because we don't test? Because we don't have a lab set up just to go and do mass testing? And make no mistake, this is a difficult organism. Our students spent almost 2 years just to optimize methods, just to get good results. At the end, she could publish a lovely paper and she could actually show how in small-scale farming systems, working with a veterinary scientist, we could actually start to link to see where we are actually detecting something. And once again, it comes back to the question, does it matter? Now I want to take you to a very important situation. South Africa is in a unique situation where we can compare the informal sector and the formal sector. So we can take spinach that's produced on a big, high food safety compliant farm with Global Gap, ISO 22000 or BRC, all the standards implemented, and they deliver directly into the big retailers. So we know that food is safe, and that's our perception. And then we look at the informal sector where we perceive it as unsafe, or not safe. And then we look at how that produce is produced, how it moves to the markets, how it's transported, how it's sold. And then we say, well, is that food less safe? And it's so interesting that after 10 years, we can say to you, that food is not necessarily less safe because that supply chain is shorter. You buy and you grow, you harvest and you eat. It doesn't stand over till tomorrow or the day thereafter. But what we do know, what they all have in common, is that they all have contaminated water. They have to rely on it. And this has increased in our country to alarming levels throughout the country. And it's severely affected our agricultural production systems. So the WRC asked us to prepare a policy brief to develop a fit-for-purpose system for irrigation water guidelines, not only for commercial farmers, but to look at it for small-scale farmers. And this is one example of source tracking. So what we did with some of these studies is we could see, we could very clearly show how from the water, and you can take any of these case studies or samples, where we actually took it from the river water, and then we could find and trace it back to the soil and the spinach. So we could show, using source tracking, the connection between the E. coli that's in the irrigation water and then whoops on the crop and then being sold on the market. And this to us is very important. And it's not only important because then we looked at the street foods and we said, okay, well, what's happening in terms of AMR in the street foods? And of course, a nice publication later, multi-drug resistance from fresh produce sold and the informal sector. So yes, we could go and look at tomatoes, spinach. We looked at carrots and apples, and we just kept sampling. We went to all the different informal sectors, and we come up with, I think, quite disturbing results. But then once again, does it matter? How important is it for us for fresh produce and for food safety concerns? And what should we do? We know that ESBL produces an environment. We know it's in the irrigation water. And we know there's through source tracking, we can show the links. And yes, we can generate publications and students' graduation. My goodness, we've had amazing students, masters, PhDs. And in this case, it was a brilliant study from the gracious PhDs. We had a few PhDs here. And we could now show what's happening in the farms and where's the points of contamination. How do we solve it? And we know the biggest problem is actually basics, hygiene and sanitation. But the key is your water must be clean and potable and drinkable and usable. And if we can manage our water, we can manage the whole food system. And this takes us to a very important part. And we were involved with the FAO in this specific section, and this was really looking at quantitative microbial risk assessment. This is part of one of our PhD students' projects. But what is important is that we've used these tools to now take and collate all our research results. And we've used it in these studies, and it's fed directly into these FAO guidelines for food safety risks at a national level. And we've actually published a microbial risk assessment guidance for food. I've been part of that group, technical expert group, and we've used our results to help. And now we've done a training in South Africa of our regulators and researchers by FAO with us, trying to see how can we address these challenges. And this takes me to, do we have capacity in South Africa to do risk assessment, to do risk ranking? We can pick it up, but so what? Is it important? What is the impact and the long-term impact for people? And how important is. And what I can tell you, we don't have risk assessment potential capacity in this country, and it must change. We must train students in this to support government and to help us and to get a better idea of what is. So the opportunities are there, and I want to show you, we have created these platforms. This is one of the partnerships we have. We have now two massive European Union Horizon projects with a whole group of scientists all over the continent and linking them to McGill University and the Wageningen or Leiden groups in the Netherlands. And we can now say we have a cluster of researchers where through the Food Safety for Africa and FSA Africa projects, we can now actually go back to the One Health and find solutions, enhance our surveillance, and look at how can we help for sustainable farming, and very importantly, use our information for policy interventions. And this, I think, is important because we can find information and we can go and do amazing plant-based studies. This is one of our Centre of Excellence projects with the Western Cape University. And we've used one region, and we've actually used these learning journeys, working with SA Food Lab, a whole cluster of scientists. And we say, well, can we truly create transdisciplinary teams? Can we actually work towards convergence of our information and data? And I can tell you these are fantastic journeys. And it takes me to the next level, which is very important, is how do we use AI tools? Can we actually create knowledge platforms? And this is a group from Ubuntu in the Netherlands, and they are working with us on the Food Safety for Africa project, and they are creating the AI tools for us. And we've created a curating kind of system where we feed information into this, and we can now, with these analogs, we can now actually do more than we could do a year or two ago. So it's really a platform for experts, regulators, researchers, and industry and companies And it's very important to connect scientists, the professionals, and to make sure that we get to a point of improved food and, very importantly, see how we can provide food safety solutions and how we can have and build an inclusive food system that can actually make and ensure more effective project coordination and enable better policy guidance. I want to, and I know my time is almost up, and Fancy, please tell me when I must stop. Otherwise, I'll keep speaking.
Will.
But pardon?
Yes,
Can
I
I
will.
carry on? Okay.
Carry on.
So let me just tell you where all of this is going. And this is what's so fantastic. And I happen to be privileged to be involved with the African Academy of Sciences. And what we are trying to do is bring these big plans to Africa. And one of our big plans that we are supporting, and they are busy working with, there's a whole group of them, Vodan and I must say South Africa, DSTI, is incredibly supporting and working with World Bank and many other layers of role players, building this Pan-African supercomputer program and data visiting models and looking at infrastructure first and foremost. And look at how these high impact domains, bringing climate, agriculture, public health, education together. And I think it's very important to take note of what's happening. So we have this roadmap and a call for action, and how we are scaling these spaces from health to agriculture and bringing in climate. And we are looking at a target of 2030, which, so by the way, is just around the corner. And can we have a single African digital market owned by Africans with complete data sovereignty? And these last slides is not mine. It's part of this whole group that's putting these amazing proposals together. And I think it's really fantastic. So what has been achieved? Well, we've established within South Africa a food safety diagnostic unit. We're focusing on water, soil, plant food, the nexus. We have a core team of food safety experts, and it's not enough, and we need to build and expand on it. But we have a significant body of knowledge, and we've actually also now developed 3 food safety short courses focusing on your regulators. We've created this food safety knowledge hub, and we are looking at playing a local and global role. And I think it's very important that we make sure that we bring top scientists together, and we work towards these foresight initiatives. And there's so much happening. And these some of the initiatives, some of the groups. There's this brilliant work that's been done by FSNet. I always look at this and I think what they've done is so fantastic in terms of food systems frameworks that they've developed, and the digital infrastructure, and just how they link with governance. And I think it's something that we as more the basic scientists never thought, how do we take it a step further? But it's not only about take it to the policy and regulatory domain, but it's also taking it to the basic right to safe food. And that food safety is a fundamental component of the right to food. So suddenly we sit around the table with lawyers, and it's amazing. And we say, well, how do we take our information and we feed it into that to really make a difference on the ground? Because if you look at the World Bank and you look at the current losses that we have in sub-Saharan Africa, 110 billion. I mean, that must change. That's not acceptable. It's direct and indirect, and the whole impact of foodborne diseases on medical care. And if you just look at how many people get sick or die annually, I mean, these statistics and the impact on children and the elderly, and particularly in informal settlements. So we need a more resilient food system, and we must work together. And this to me is a critical turning point for Africa. Achieving food safety, and I'm not even talking about nutrition. It's obviously critical for us within a food security context, but we must have sustainable food systems. Now, I'm sure most of you know that the African Union has now established the Africa Food Safety Agency. We've got a food safety plan, and we're busy, and we're talking, and we're going to make an impact, but it's going to take time. But we do know that food safety has had a disproportionate effect on its population, and we have no idea. We don't have the capacity. We've just touched on the surface, and we have to have a bigger dream, and we need to be enabled to harmonize and look at science-driven policy and have a community-centered approach. So we are all working together. It's really incredible. We've got the NEPAD group on food safety research. We've got proposals for research chairs, and we've got the more recent ASSAf Forum for Food Safety that's really going to look at strengthening, broadening stakeholder capacity and the role of science engagement. To start concluding, it's really about resilience in the food system, and it's really about safe food for all. And I believe that some of these initiatives that we've put in place will be more inclusive, it will be community informed, and it will give us that scientific, robust foundation that we really need in this continent. And just so, by the way, safe food is not a privilege, it's a basic human right. And I feel it's important. We have worked towards helping government to develop stronger regulatory frameworks. We've pumped our information into it. We are busy with vendor education, because if you're going to go forward, you need to include all. You cannot just develop a system for the commercial sector because they are self-regulatory. We have to look at what's happening on the ground. The poorest of poor, they must have access to safe food. How do we enable them? How do we create public awareness? How do we create traceability at all sectors in life? And how do we support infrastructure in the informal sector so that they have clean water, electricity? They don't have fridges there, and they don't have access to sanitation, and we need to look at risk mitigation. I want to tell you some exciting things. This is one of the platforms we are involved in, and we're going to have this global research ecosystems that we're developing. And we look at global funding in these big ecosystems, and we are looking at what practical steps governments can do, industry and government. We have initiatives with the World Economic Forum, and we are looking at creating these research ecosystems to balance a science sovereignty. And this is just one of the examples how we're trying to bring all of this together, and it's complex. I'm just a little slice, and I'm just so privileged to be part of this group and part of this initiative. And they are going to have a meeting and the guest star in Geneva soon, and I'm privileged to be part of it. And this is how we create networks, and this is how we work together. And if we don't stand up as scientists and be engaged at all levels. So I'm sitting on these FAO, WHO technical expertise committees, and I'm pumping my data into this so we can create fit for purpose. And it's very important because we've actually brought out 4 guidance documents. And those documents from FAO, WHO go straight into Codex. And from Codex, it gets adopted. It becomes international standards, and it gets adopted by different countries. And it also feeds into standards, ISO standards, and then our own South African national standards. And it also feeds into OECD standards. So this is how we can, in our small way, impact globally. And I think it's important. But let's not forget, it is about scientists. It's about fun. Let's never let the fun go out of science. And you have to have committed people who really work hard. And I've been privileged to be part of an amazing group of young people who's energetic and is putting in everything, who's publishing these papers. And it was small beginnings, but my goodness, there's a whole generation of dynamic young women that's now going into postdocs that's been trained through incredible sponsorships, through global and local sponsorships, and they've been able to put out their work on the world stage and I believe make a big difference. Thank you very much.